Hello, everyone. I'm Japudu Guya, Professional Officer here at ICLE Africa. Welcome to the very last session of the Building Capacity for Circular Economy Innovation series. This series has been co-convened by ICLE Africa and the African Circular Economy Network as part of the ACE Africa Action and Learning events. ACE Africa is funded by the Embassy of Finland to South Africa. In today's session, which is entitled Financing for Circular Innovation, Who De-Risks the Vision? But before we get started, I would just like to go through some housekeeping. So just to note that this session is being recorded, and by remaining in the session, you are consenting to be recorded. We also welcome and highly encourage you to be active during the course of this session and to share any comments or questions that you might have in the chat box. A recording of the session will also be shared on the ACE Africa webpage after this session ends. As we begin, I'd also just like to check who is joining us and where you're joining us from. So in the chat, if you could please just share with us who you are, where you're joining us from, and perhaps one thing that interests you about the circular economy. It would be interesting if it's also related to today's session, which is around financing for the circular economy. So for today's session, we're going to be having a very interesting conversation between Chris White, who is a director at ASIN, as well as Wasa Sisa, who is an investment analyst at the Bestseller Foundation. One of the key questions we'd like to tackle for today's session is asking who or how do we de-risk opportunities for the financial sector that could unlock sustainable or circular economy funding for future development. Those with a background in financing and the circular economy might better understand this, but financing new ideas and products can be very risky. And what's more risky than financing the unknown? And this has been one of the limiting factors to financing the circular economy projects as well as ideas. So we've been asking how can we then mainstream finance towards innovative circular economy ideas across the continent. These are just some of the questions that we're going to be discussing in today's session. So I'd just like to then hand over to Chris to give us an overview of the topic for today's session, as well as jump into the discussion and a conversation with Wissa. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Jokuru, and welcome to everybody. And thank you very much for joining us. Today's session is planned to be somewhat a little bit more relaxed, not so much in the way of formal presentations. But the idea really is to understand, this is the last of our series in terms of the ACE Africa system. And here we're looking at financing the circular innovation, circular economy. These are key issues that we face across Africa and across the globe, particularly with regard to looking at the implementation and development around finance. But maybe let's contextualize that. So effectively what has happened globally is that we are starting to see a very key alignment with regards to particularly climate finance, and everything seems to be going into climate finance at the moment. What we want to try and do is draw the parallels between circular economy and climate finance, particularly if one's looking at the carbon systems and opportunities around that. The circular economy allows for multiple different applications on financing, specifically around low carbon and restorative regenerative transitions across multiple sectors, from infrastructure to manufacturing, agriculture, health, nutrition, mining. And these are all opportunities and applications that we need to look at. The problem is that we've really been looking at mostly grant funding and agency type funding for circular economy projects for the last decade or so. And circular economy really is the buzzword at the moment. It's the forefront of everybody's mindset. But how do we look at mainstreaming finance? And specifically when we look at that, we need to contextualize that in terms of what's happened globally. And globally, post COP26, we've had an alignment from a financing perspective, specifically looking at the particular issues around the international financial regulation systems, IFRS, and that has also created now the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board. And to put that into layman's terms, effectively what it means is that we are now looking at gearing into ESG reporting, environmental, social, and governance reporting, that is more realistic, that is more transparent, that is more real with regards to achieving the goals and requirements of the climate pacts. That links into mainstream financing issues, particularly around the application of the ratings agencies. So Standard, Fitch, Moody's, all of these ratings agencies are now already linked in as to how they guide and direct the opportunities in terms of ratings. So whether you are a bank, whether you're a government, whether you're a corporate, and those are all key issues that are going to start aligning the opportunities in terms of circular economy applications, because circular economy fits the requirement in terms of climate finance through whichever sector you're looking at. So when we're looking at energy, water, infrastructure, agriculture, fisheries, you name the sector, there are particular applications where we can look at it from a climate perspective. And the climate perspective is also based around the just transition. And a just transition is making sure that we get a transformative and inclusive growth and development around making sure that we have a sustainable future for all of us. So when it comes down to understanding financing, we are already seeing a lot of fantastic work done through our partners like Footprints Africa, where we are looking at mapping out and understanding what circular economy projects are out there and who's doing what. And most of them, I can tell you with a level of certainty, are all saying to themselves, how do we get financing to get this thing to the next level? How do we scale what we are doing and get it to a level where it makes sense? And moving things out of the unknown to the known. So, we're moving, for example, in agriculture from a restorative basis, which 10, 15 years ago was the realm of people with long ponytails digging, digging in their gardens with earthworms, into now large-scale applications where we can look at regenerative applications of making sure we put carbon back into the soil and maintain our systems. And those have impacts in terms of health, education, biodiversity, etc. The finance side of it is problematic. And it really is, I always talk about the fact that if I went to the bank and asked for $1 million to open up a biscuit factory, it's a very easy thing to do because everybody eats biscuits. And I can say, I'm going to make 1 million biscuits and I'm going to charge $1 a biscuit. Your finances are very happy with it from a due diligence perspective. When you start looking at circular economy, because there is an unknown, we need to start looking at the mainstream applications with regards to the sectors as opposed to the circular economy. So we need to say, right, this is an infrastructure application, this is an agriculture application, this is a social application. These are the different opportunities where we can attract regular finance through the mainstream applications, through the banks, through conventional financing systems, as opposed to constantly having to rely on grants and agency type funding. So the conversation today really is, how do we get there? How do we look at understanding these opportunities that are presented to us and make sure that we capitalize on those in the soonest time possible, to ensure that we start to create the change on the ground that's needed and make projects happen across Africa and across the developing world, across the globe. So from that perspective, it really is a very open conversation. We have a great number of people on here with a lot of brains, so we're going to open that up. But first of all, I want to hand over to Wasa just to comment on my opening comments and provide her own insights into this. Wasa, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Wasa Sise. I am Ivorian and I am living in Kigali. I work for Bestseller Foundation, an impact investment fund based in Copenhagen. We've recently opened our African office here in Kigali, Rwanda. So we do investment in circular economy since, we exist since 2015, pretty much sector agnostic from the beginning. And a bit like what Chris said, the more you work in the space, the more narrowed the focus becomes. So the more the investment we made since 2015, the more we realized that they were all turning around natural resources management and all. So we narrowed our focus to waste management and then to circular economy. We invest in sub-Saharan Africa now, different facilities, but we'll talk a little bit more about what we do and how we do it. But one other thing that Chris mentioned on how do we attract, like not only commercial finance, but the mainstream one into the circular economy that we're doing. We did observe that firsthand through one of our initiatives. So we launched a Voice to Value Accelerator. It was our pilot the first time. We launched it in 4 countries. So it was Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, 200 plus applications, but we only had very few of them that were, responding to criteria, things that everybody used, to make a selection and everything. So we did had less than 10 that finally been selected only in Uganda and Kenya. They went through some technical assistance, got some funding and everything, but we all kept wondering how can we do more, right? Because the sector is, like Chris said, is in everybody's mouth, is the hot topic. Everybody is entering it. Everybody is trying to do something. So how does everybody know exactly what to do and where to be the most catalytic? The type of funding that can be provided, the type of technical assistance and capacity building, the type of knowledge that could be out there. How do we support the small, very small businesses to the very big one in different levels? So I think that's something that we're very excited about for this discussion, because that's one of the things that we'll be discussing as well.
So in terms of some of the things we've been discussing kind of off the discussion here is that how do we de-risk these things? So there's a lot of work that you're doing through Bestseller and other agencies. The problem often in terms of accessing finance is that when you start to look at the requirements around due diligence, specifically, that also engages in terms of the organization. So its capacity, its own governance, its own track record, its own capabilities and expertise. And then also looking at the de-risking side of things. How do we look at projects where we don't have extended ROIs that make finances sweaty? And look at opportunities where we can engage applications where we take that risk away from a financing perspective, but also from a due diligence perspective. And there's a lot of organizations, and you'll find this, that they don't have that knowledge and know-how. And how do organizations like yours, ours, ICLEI, and others on this call help and assist in terms of driving that opportunity to create the skills and expertise and capacity that brings those together? And I noticed there's one person on the call I had a chat with earlier today who's also looking at the financing side. And it's like, how do we create those connections between the people who are looking for finance and those people who need the finance? And perhaps also give them some level of advice beforehand in understanding the pain they're going to go through and how we can help them in terms of being able to unlock those opportunities. How's it from your side? I mean, what do you do in terms of providing that extra capacity and support?
Yeah, we like to brand ourselves as the go-to circular economy investor. You mentioned it, there's not a lot of them doing it, and that's something that we're really happy that we're doing. But I think before thinking about the type of investment that we provide and the additional capital, capacity building or technical assistance or support that we provide, it's pretty essential to try to understand the pain points of the businesses in the circular economy that we face on a daily basis. So since we landed or set foot in Kigali and opened our first African office, we did engage with several stakeholders, just because we realized that here, at least here in Rwanda and a little bit across East Africa, the circular economy businesses, the ecosystem even is niche, and the businesses were very early stages. So there were several challenges that we have to overcome before thinking about the type of funding that we're going to put out there and the support. And some of them were the development stage, very early stage businesses around the country's expansion. So it takes some time to understand the right business model in that space. And when you do like having capex is pretty high. It's a pretty high investment for them to grow. The small margin, there's a lot of factors that enter in account for a business to grow. The business model in general, so there's new solution, new market, all of that can be difficult. And then there's a bunch of inefficiencies in general process. How do we make resources more efficient? How do we make sure that the value chain is not fragmented? How do we make sure that we access those service providers? And in addition to all of that, the impact-driven businesses are expensive. They require high upfront financing, the infrastructure in general. Just raising is expensive as well. Another one was finance in general. There's not a lot of flexibility in terms of the instrument that are used in the ecosystem. How do you call that? Like the general VC model does not necessarily fit this type of business. So the room and the risk that's needed for impact-driven finance, for blended finance, there's not a lot of it, and there's not a lot of players in that space. And last challenge that we saw a lot was the ecosystem in general. So it is new. The circular economy ecosystem is relatively new and it's constantly growing. So there's more and more players and all doing activities pretty much isolated. So how do we create linkages between all of these players so that that company that you look at from the very niche and early stage business can grow to a space where they're sustainable, they're strong enough, and they can create way more impact in, did identify this type of risk. The first, at least one of our main strategy now to provide adequate funding and additional support is through, and it will probably sound a little bit cliche, but partnership and collaboration, right? We sat down with so many different players talking about what are each of the players doing in the different space, the incubators, the accelerators, the initiatives, the funding that they are proposing, the criteria for them, and how we can all come together to try to provide a more like catalytic support throughout the value chain. So we realized that there were different stages for all the businesses. So at the foundation, we have 3 facilities. We have our seed fund that targets very early stage businesses. And this one is our last facility, actually. The last to come up. And that came from the observation that businesses needed proof of concept, testing, and all of that. And there were no space for them to actually do that. So our investments are pretty much indirect, while previously we were doing pretty much direct type of investments. So now we go through third parties, those being incubators, accelerators, or any other people dealing with very smaller size of businesses. Then we also have our scale up and our startup investment, where we are pretty much direct in our approach. And we also divided the instrument that we're using. So for the startup, we are pretty much happy. We usually go for recoverable grant or recoverable loan, depending on the size of the business, and more equity for the scale up one, and still trying to find a formula for the seed one, So it's really being open to the risk and also trying out. I think that's one of the things that came out from all of our discussion. How do we try out instruments that are flexible, not only for the company, but also for the investor side? Something that will make them believe that they have room to grow and test, and secure their product or their services, but also that will make an investor comfortable enough to bring other investors on board, and all of that. That's something that we do. For example, we also we talk all the time with like-minded investors to de-risk our investment across our different facilities. So we look for opportunities to attract commercial investment, but also impact-driven investment, people that are looking at job creation, gender, informal waste speakers, plastic pollution, so very thematic ones, and people that are looking for, that are working through a general VC approach as well. Yeah.
I think this is the issue, is that, from my understanding, I mean, we haven't met for long, so my understanding is that you're kind of a facilitator, and those funds are coming through, and people are feeling the pressure to put that funding in, and they need a group like yourselves to facilitate and get those into place, and I think that's commendable. how do we take it to the next stage? And I see one of my friends from Mauritius is on the call as well. Just in terms of some of the answers or the questions that I'm getting, like from the banking sector in Mauritius, who are saying we are under pressure through this ISSB and COP26 and everything else. We are under pressure to invest in green projects, low carbon projects. And how do we do that? So we also need to look at not only engaging with the circular economy innovators and the SMEs on the ground, but how do we also engage with the finance groups, with the banks, the people right at the coalface, where we can say to them, how do we get them to understand what is the circular economy, what is climate finance, and how do we look at the alignment between the two and the opportunity to drive that? So I think what you are doing and what Bestsellers are doing, and there are a couple of other organizations around doing similar sort of things. I think it's a great initiative in terms of getting the ball rolling, but we need to take it to that next stage. And how do we get to those banks? How do we look at us as organizations, or is this something where we put pressure on COP27 coming up in Egypt to develop guidelines where we can go to mainstream financing and ensure that we have a system and a process where we can take this through? I don't know if we have anybody from African Development Bank on the call. I haven't managed to whip through everybody, but I think we need to take it to that next stage, because yes, we can facilitate. And I think through your organization, through the stuff we do at ASIN Foundation, ICLEI, Ellen MacArthur, I see her on the call as well. So there's a whole host of different options where we can look at that. But how do we take that next step?
Yeah, I think banks are one of the players to look at. Others investors as well, because in addition to just being facilitators, we do invest on our own, right? One of our goals is actually to build the largest pipeline of circular economy businesses here, and we're on the track to do that, right? But how do we make sure that once they're done with our different stages, for example, how do they access more capital and more support in all of that? And one of the things that was working pretty well here, at least we're pretty privileged to have that, is that the banks do understand what circular economy is, or at least what climate finance is. Some of the partners here, some of the players on the ground, like we have the Global Green Initiative here, we have FONEWA, which is the government green fund, and some banks that have specific initiatives that are targeting either renewable energy, circular economy, or other type of programs, right? But they still have their own mandate as a bank, right? They still have due diligence to go through. They still have some criteria that they are looking at. So the biggest challenge will be to make them look at circular businesses, or at least at the pipeline that we are looking at as potential investees as well, right? And there's several points on that, the several points to get there. We spoke a little bit about how do we make due diligence cheaper, for example, so that they can access finance. And you have companies like Unconventional Capital that are using data-driven assessment and how do you call the algorithm, basing on entrepreneurial potential of the company as the core of the due diligence. Because look, you can't assess a very early stage business as the same as a fintech. In circular economy, they are different. So you have to look at them differently. So the potential of the business, the potential of the entrepreneur itself are things that should matter. But how do we make sure that they are not biased by the investor or by human bias in general? So companies like Unconventional Capital are doing things like that. So there's still opportunities for banks to use those metrics and those methodologies to still make the investment. And if not, it's going through those middlemen, or at least those mid parties like the accelerators and incubators that have strict and clear selection criteria and a clear program, and at their own due diligence that could be shared upon the different final investors, and then reach the startup. But I think that will not solve the whole problem, because something that I see a lot is how the businesses cannot even absorb the funding that can be provided by the bank, right? Banks have a different range for the ticket sizes, and they are often too big for what the very early stage one can take, or the middle one even. So there's a need to break down and make sure that there's different type of capital and different levels and amounts throughout the journey. So banks are one of the people to turn to, but there's so many other players that have to get there before they get to the point where the banks are more comfortable. That's the second one. The third one is probably something that's very common. It's how informal workers, small and medium SMEs struggle to access bank loans and other type of funding, not because their business is not cannot grow, has no potential, but they don't necessarily have that history, that bank, a credit score and all of that make them bankable. So businesses across the continent are trying to look at that. How do we make informal workers, waste speakers more formalized, or how do we create for them like a bank or a financial history, something that can be used as a bank passport for them to access smaller loans and and you go. So technological transformation is entering the circular economy. So you have digital technologies. So you have blockchain and IoT, people using them to create those small historical background that can then be leveraged to access more funding. Or physical technologies, there's more happening. And I think that's some of the things that we don't consider a lot. How do we integrate all the other solutions that are existing outside of CE per se to the problem that we are facing right now, so they can, move on and take off from here.
Yeah, agreed. And I see there's a bit of chatter going on, which is great. So some of the stuff that's coming through, for example, is understanding access on seed funding, but then also trying to, there's a realization that there's sort of a grabbing at the low-hanging fruit, and there are not too many serious investors. And we know that people are now trying to look at angel investors and venture capitalists, but that's really, really expensive funding. What are the opportunities as well? It's something we've raised at another forum in terms of governments getting involved. And not necessarily, I'm not really a supporter of the grant system. I think if the project is not commercially viable, grants can often be abused. And I think we've seen a lot of hesitancy around that. But when we start looking at opportunities around, for example, tax holidays or cheaper access to funding, looking at payment holidays that allows the scope for these sort of projects to get wings and gain traction without being bogged down from the start in terms of repayments. Looking at other applications, for example, I know in South Africa there are applications where one can look at sort of a 12J type tax incentive. And that links into sort of a climate finance type opportunity. But a lot of people don't understand where that is, how to access it, and even if they could access it, probably not have the skills and systems to put that together. So there's that gap between the small sort of startups and the seed up to your mainstream financing, where, I mean, from my own personal perspective, I found if you're not talking at least $10 to $50 million, people aren't interested in talking to you. So there's a big gap in that perspective as well. So we need to create financial opportunities where we can look at finances who can work with groups like Bestseller to say, right, how do you guys understand this stuff? Let us, you handle the risk for us and try and work on it from that basis. We've also got some some comments here on Global Finance Solution Consultancy Company. Thank you for put that on. I will chat to anybody who's got money. But really just to try and see how we access the mainstream side of things. And that really comes down to, again, we come back to the banks. And do we need to, as organizations, instead of focusing on the SMEs, maybe we should be focusing on taking those lessons to the banks and saying, how do you understand what circular economy and climate financing is? So that the banks, who have way more access and far greater reach across the different sectors and across different countries, would then be in a better position to understand their risk with regards to financing into climate smart applications. So when we look at where we're coming from in the modern world now, post COP26 and the alignment of the new Green Deal in Europe, understanding the issues around global supply chains, understanding the issues around COVID and pandemics, and countries' requirement to become more self-reliant and stop relying on imports, and change that dynamic through circular economy approaches, where we start looking at local utilization of resources, where we start to reduce those costs of transactions and start to understand the benefits of that from a balance of trade perspective and an opportunity. So there's a number of different ways we can do that, but we're not getting there. And I think there's some great stuff that people like yourself are doing. And we need to get this message across to the big boys at the table. And I don't know if there's any of the big boys on the call at the moment, but I haven't noticed any names that I can link up from my own knowledge. But we need to get this, and I think maybe COP27 could be an opportunity to look at saying, how do we do this? How do we create alignment from conventional financing and also sort of cross-border financing to look at sustainable applications that we can de-risk and align to a sort of a climate finance? Because all the money's in climate at the moment. You talk to the finances, and circular economy is still new. Climate finances, we've been banging that door for a few years now, so we've got them aligned there. But the circular economy meets many of those objectives, not only in terms of climate, but also in terms of sustainable development goals. So there's a lot of ways we need to do that. Any wild suggestions? What's the best opportunity?
Oof.
Any messages from the floor as well? Throw them in on the chat.
Yeah, I think I would love to hear what the floor has to say. Am I back? Yeah. I would love to hear what the audience has to say, right? Because you're right. Circular economy does gather everything that everybody's trying to solve, right, in terms of climate change and everything. There's a tremendous possibility for social impact. There's that room for intersectionality across all different sectors, because you can have circular economy in every different industry and sector. There's also the fact that it's just at the heart of solving all the many environmental challenges that we've been talking about: plastic pollution, natural resources management, waste management, and so much more, right? And we see, we see the innovations from the company side, right? One of our investees, Mr. Green, the technology-driven company, the plastic collection company, and then they have that creates value addition throughout their value chain. We have Y-Waste that's that's making fertilizer out of organic waste. We have Zafri that make pulp for paper and paper products without using trees from agricultural waste and all of that. So innovation on this side is there, right? But now what we need as well, as you mentioned, maybe there's some of them in the room, but how do we make sure that we have a great regulatory environment? So from a policy side, something that encourage different type of funding in different type of countries, they encourage relationship between different countries, they encourage expansion of one business from, taking it from Kenya to Rwanda to Nigeria, etc., like have a framework that allows them to grow, to attract more funding, to for the investor to come together and all of that. But how do we do that? What will be the big and brilliant idea to make that happen? I don't think we figured that out, right? Nobody. We are all trying to do it, but such at a small scale. Yeah, everybody try to build partnership and relationship within the ecosystem, then knowledge from other places, and all of that. And I think that's one of the, I think we make a great step forward during the pandemic, because now we didn't have really the borders, right? So we can all speak like that through phones, share knowledge, and actually have due diligence online and partnership online, actually have those cross borders conversation. So that's probably the biggest step that we made before, and it didn't come from within, it came from a pandemic. So the next big one, maybe it's in the audience, I don't know, but I would like to hear what people have to say about it.
Well, there's some interesting things that are coming through. So I think Rosalie Ackerman, she's come through saying that there's a concern that the banks will kind of stumble over themselves for a bit too long. And effectively what's going to happen is that the bigger businesses are going to self-fund, and they're going to steal a whole bunch of ideas and take it over, and we're going to create this increased divide. So it's very against what we are trying to do, which is the just transition. And that just transition does align with climate finance. And I think we need to look at that. And there's been, I think Chloe agreed with Rosalie. So it will cut out the entrepreneurs if we don't move fast enough on that. And I think we do need to focus on how we ensure that we don't exclude the SME sector from that. And even Guerra says maybe an opportunity would be kind of I think she says a dummy's guide to due diligence and risk mitigation. So getting that sort of information, which we can, as a group in the sector, be able to try and pull that information together. And there's a challenge of scaling. Thaven, you got your hand up. Would you want to unmute yourself and let us know what your question is there?
Yeah, so sorry that you can't see me. Yeah, I mean, I think really one has to start adopting a programmatic approach. In terms of the level of scale and the speed at which one has to move, I don't think a project by project approach really is going to help much. And I think the challenge of a programmatic approach is try to find the processes within that program that are replicable. So you don't have to start from square one all over again. And, you know, the idea of being able to move technologies from one country to another is a fantastic start because you've got an operational model. But it does another thing in that you are then able to go to scale, which then starts becoming more attractive to investors. But there's a huge challenge there in terms of the point of investment. So, you know, if, for example, you are looking, and, you know, I hate using recycling in circular economy discussions, but let's just talk about recycling, for example, right? You know, you could have different scales of technologies that work for different streams, for different waste streams. And you could identify in Southern Africa, for example, 20 cities of the same scale with similar kind of waste stream components and have a technology that works for all of them. And you can find that point of agglomeration, whether the investment is with the company itself that is providing the technology, but, you know, you have a point of agglomeration to create a programmatic approach. But the issue of scaling is a study on its own. And I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do on scaling itself.
Thank you, Thaven. I think you're right. I mean, the scaling side of things is absolutely essential, but then we also need to understand the context of scale within Africa. So often we are inundated with offers from sort of our northern neighbors in Europe and the States who are saying, here's the technology, here's the solution. But you look at the size and the scale of it and the capital cost behind it, it's just not economically viable. And there is opportunity for scaled technology, and we're seeing this coming through amazingly at the moment now, sort of small scale gasification, pyrolysis systems, crushing systems, processing systems that are at a scale that really works at that SME level. And opportunities in terms of trying to drive that, but we also need to look at the supply chain behind that. How do we create the supply chain to ensure that we have the offtake, and with demand that will de-risk the problem? So I'm busy working with government here at the moment to look at the application of saying, how do we find markets for specific waste products? And government has a role to play there as well. So procurement, material specification, those are different applications that will create demand that will also de-risk applications into those sort of opportunities. But the idea is also, I think, that we need to look at more South-South cooperation as well. I know that with ASIN, for example, we're doing a lot of work now with sort of Indonesia, Malaysia, there with the South America and India, to look at what works in those countries as well. So we need to do sort of South-South coordination in terms of understanding, you know, where we can help each other with regards to applications on technology. The reality, again, if you look at something, you know, the scale is the issue. I mean, I know that there's a couple of the big climate financiers who are looking at massive scale projects. So when we're looking at regenerative agriculture, again, how do we change a mindset? So we're looking at something where you're putting carbon back into the soil, we're using agricultural residues, we're using it in a circular fashion, we're looking at black soldier fly and protein from waste. We're looking at vermiculture, static pile composting, biochar systems, energy systems, and then getting that carbon back into the soil. And this is something that we should be doing on a global scale when you start to look at the benefits of regenerative agriculture, not only from a human and environmental perspective, but from a health perspective in terms of the planet and a cost perspective, particularly now with regards to the international costs of fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, and moving to a more regenerative basis. But we have been funding for so long farmers on a system of non-sustainability, where we've got to put more chemicals in, we've got to put more fertilizers in, and we've got to change those mindsets so that the funders are also being bamboozled by the linear economy. People have been doing the same thing for a long time, and how do we change that? So there's some other comments on here, as some useful information there from Suzanne, thank you, in terms of looking at that guide, evaluating projects according to circular economy hierarchy. And from Shahida about the SMME sector going through in the 90s, strategy to simulate the financial sector. So we need an advocacy program and how to, but Shahida, how do we structure that? Mentors is useful, and also intersection where we look at the investors, policymakers, regulators, entrepreneurs, bankers, etc. How do we do that? I mean, I think we all know roughly what needs to be done. If you look at a results-based financial model, and also that comes back to what people talk about with impact investing. Are impact investors actually investing in impact? And how do we move it in that right system? So there's a lot of great comments on here. We need to move away from whether or not this is a large company or SMEs. Fair enough. I think we need to, as long as we're moving in the right direction, but we need to also keep the just transition in mind. I can't keep up with the chats here. Okay, they're flying through at the moment. Guerra, Jokuru wants to ask Wasa if there are 3 top key things that small businesses should prioritize and can improve their chances of accessing funding. That's a straightforward question. Wasa, what are the top 3?
Okay, top 3. Okay, I think the first one will be for a business to understand, like to have skills in business development, project management, financial management, like understand the business and how they make it grow. Then the second one would be for them to be oriented through at least improving the data indicator framework and collection. How do they actually track the impact that they're doing? How do they account for the resource efficiency or waste improve, all of that? Like, how do they keep track of the value that they're creating, in addition to how do they grow their business on a financial and commercial level? And the third thing will be for them to be aware of what is happening in like all the other initiatives in the private sector, because something that happens a lot in the CE ecosystem, businesses are almost the same, right? So how do you make sure that you're learning from the failure or the mistakes of other businesses and build upon that too, because you're going to reach there at some point, so you will probably have that same problem. So how do you get yourself ready to counter this? I think by being ready on this 3 level, understanding your business model and how to make it grow financially, business-wise, project management, logistic-wise, understanding your data and impact, how you collect it, the type of indicators, framework, often and how you collect it, what type of impact you collect, impact data you collect, and 3, what is happening in that ecosystem, especially for businesses that are doing the same as you, can be something that can answer all the questions for any investors. I think those 3 should be the main point, at the moment.
So I mean, that makes sense, but I mean, again, Rosalie brings up, is this not again just an oxymoron? We're trying to find something new instead of trying to see how we mainstream the existing opportunities. So I think there's always going to be a role for the likes of booksellers. I mean, where there's organizations, and there should be more, that help to align and provide that mentorship and support. But it's got to get beyond that at some stage, where we can eventually get to mainstream financing. So the reality is that we need to move away from what you're doing. I don't want to put you out of a job. I think you're doing a great job. but we really need to get it into that mainstream financing. But a lot of what you're doing is the groundwork to that, where we can now say, listen, we can show you 2 or 3 applications across the world where it actually is working. We can show you the numbers behind it. And that helps to de-risk. It also helps, from a technology perspective on financing. We know people like to go and kick the tires. Don't try and bring a brand new innovation in, because that's virtually impossible to fund. There you've got to find your grant funding. But we've got to try and create those different opportunities to see how we collectively help circular economy transition moving forward, to ensure that we start to get into that mainstream. And that's why I said to you before, I think maybe we need to look at the fact that the likes of booksellers and other similar organizations should be saying, what we're doing with the SMEs, we should also be doing with the finances. And saying, how do we start to create that alignment, create a guidebook, as somebody said there, what's the dummy's guide to de-risking and looking at due diligence, and create those opportunities where we can start to pull all of this stuff together. So Suzanne has put on a thing in terms of the kind of subsidies that we're up against, looking at resource alternatives. It is difficult, and I think we need to understand those blockages, and that's where it's very important for us to provide those levels of support. Deborah says, can we tag them as circular? That it is discrimination. You're quite right, because often it's discrimination on the basis that often the funders don't understand that circular side. So it's something new. Maybe we are hamstringing them by saying, this is circular, or this is innovative, or this is new, but rather to say, let's look at this purely from the economic perspective. And often, a lot of the work that I'm doing with some of the big international funders now is to say, let's look at this from a perspective of understanding the benefit. First of all, you work on the economic benefit. And I'm a firm believer in that if this thing is not going to make money, it's not going to fly. It's as simple as that. And corporates and governments are going to focus on things that create jobs, create money, create opportunities. We're not going to focus on the hard things to do. So we need to leave those for later, which is very sad, but I think we need to make sure that we gain traction and start to drive opportunities where we are starting to create a model of conventional financing to something that was previously deemed as sort of innovative.
I wanted to jump on what Deborah was saying, right? She has a point. Tagging companies as circular can be limiting for themselves, for investors and all. But you see what happens a lot is that the companies that are working in the circular economy space do not even tag themselves as such. They will probably do not even know that what they are doing is circular. That's something that we saw a lot. They will be doing something that we say, but when we launch the call for application here, for example, and in some incubators, and a lot of the people that were applying, or at least deemed that it wasn't necessary for them to apply, were exactly what we were looking for, right? So they are all businesses that are trying to raise funds, right? And something that is important to understand is that circular economy at the end of the day is still a concept, something that can be implemented in anything. So it's not just like if I was saying I was working in agriculture, that's a full sector, because you can have circular economy in agriculture, in healthcare, in. So the business do not have to be branded as circular, but the work that they are doing is, right? So that's something that they can leverage when they are raising fund and all of that. They can still have something that they are doing in their whole business model that just touch to what we are looking for at the end of the day, right? Because you don't just how do we say that? Like, you don't separate them like, oh, these are the circular economy businesses and these are the agricultural businesses, because you will see most of the time they overlap, right? So maybe it is a small mistake to say we're investing in circular economy businesses, but circular economy businesses mean businesses that are looking at reducing, reusing, at having a more efficient use of resources throughout their value chain, right? And I think that's that distinction that we should be making as we move in that conversation.
No, those are good points, and I think maybe it's also about bringing it into understanding the words that we use. I think I mentioned right at the beginning the opportunity in terms of aligning climate finance with circular economy. should be perhaps the way that we are thinking, because banks are under pressure to look at climate finance, as are governments, as are corporates, in terms of their alignment, specifically with regards to their ESG reporting. And that's going to impact their sustainability going forward. If they don't toe the line, they will be left behind. And often, people say, well, how does that affect the SMEs? Well, it affects the SMEs because they perform the upstream and the downstream value chains or supply chains of those bigger corporations. And I think there's bigger opportunities there. So perhaps we need to change the narrative again and say, right, there's a lot of money in climate finance. And we know that if you unpack it, if you look at the infrastructure sector, we know that we can change to non-cement type products. We can change to more thermally efficient local resource type materials that meet that requirement with the carbon offset. We can do the same thing with agriculture. We can do the same thing with energy, and we can do it with water, etc. So maybe it's a case of saying, how do we take the lesson of what the circular economy brings to climate finance to align those financial opportunities in terms of what we're doing? Who does that? And maybe that's up to us. Maybe we are the ones who've got to take that message to the finances and say, guys, everyone's running around trying to look at climate finance, and you're battling to look at where to put your money. I think it was Rosalie who said, if we don't end up using the money, it's going to be sitting in funds because we're too risk averse. But we've got to change that to saying, how do we look at that focus, and look at driving it from that perspective. Sorry, I'm trying to read questions and talk at the same time. So Boyega, what happens when certain assets in your business meet the green classification, others don't? As a result, such SMEs may not get the fully funding required. That's a complicated question, Boyega. We need to unpack that one. But it is an issue. Not everything can be aligned on the green ticket or the climate ticket. Daniel, to follow up on Deborah's comment, another issue with some SMEs is that we're so passionate, work assiduously to tick all the circularity principles without investing such kind of energy on the businesses or the finance side of things. So that's very true. And I think we need to focus on all of those different components. So we're kind of going in sort of our own little circle here at the moment, as opposed to the circular economy. We've got 8 minutes left. What do we take as the big takeaways from here? What do we do as a community, as an organization, as a group of like-minded people to align this level of thinking? I mean, I know, for example, I've got to rush off to Cape Town the next day or two to go and look at a World Benchmarking Alliance application so that I can get in there and stick my hand up and be disruptive, to make sure that people listen and see the opportunities in the circular economy. And each of us can do that in our own way. Any juicy points coming out from the floor here? I can't see any hands up. Zakia. Key limits was identified. There's different circular. Okay, so some great links in there from Zakia, and also our the COP meeting on financing the circular economy. So have a look at that information as well. Daniel, your hand is up. Can you unmute yourself?
Thank you so much, Chris. Maybe just to I must first of all say that I'm not a finance person, but in terms of what I've seen so far, I think when we talk and I think we've reflected about banks and their roles and things like that. But in a way also, the multilateral institutions, to what extent have they also in a way adopted the circular economy model? And you see a lot of pushing for green economy, climate financing, and you could even see Africa Development Bank or whichever, all of these people having their publications on it. But when you look at circular economy, as it were, you see that there is still that gap in terms of ownership. of that concept. And if there is no drive, especially from the multilateralization that is, which maybe I will call supranationals feeding into like ECOWAS, Africa Development Bank, if there is no linkage between those ones and the national government, and then that trickles down, then we may be missing a lot of things. It also applies to the recognition of circular economy. Do our central banks actually recognize circular economy as a model, as an approach that we need to go into? I think that was why I'm so keen on seeing how the Africa Development Bank, the new Africa Circular Economy Facility, how it's going to shape up to see what will it look like and what will be their propositions, because I think that we need a drive. The Scandinavian countries are actually doing a lot, and I think we have benefited from that, trying to push this agenda. I think so. In a way, we need to see those kind of changes and those linkages from the supranational government, say SADC, AFDB, ECOWAS, in even their policy document. And just like you have said, I think it's high time we started seeing. I've seen a lot of publications from all the global pushers of circular economy, but in terms of having publications, which basically trying to link climate financing with the circular economy, or maybe the issue of climate change with circular economy. Very clearly, we've told, so when you read about circular economy, you look at the principles, the models, the strategies and things like that, action plans and all of that. But then to what extent can it actually address issues of climate change, and basically looking at how, because just like I've said, climate financing, it will be very useful in climate financing, trying to see some documentations or publications coming forward and policy guidance on how we can leverage climate financing for circular economy transition. I think that is also key.
No, absolutely. But again, I think you talked about the African Development Bank Circular Economy Facility. And again, what we are doing is we're just underpinning this issue of looking at agency or that type of funding instead of mainstreaming. And we were putting, there's a big song and dance, we're putting 4 million euros into developing circular economy in Africa. I mean, it's hardly going to touch sites. So the requirement really is to look at that mainstreaming, but we've got to try and bring that data together. Beza, your hand is up. You're on mute, Beza.
Thank you for the floor, Chris. My suggestion is, imagine an organization wants to pursue circular economy, and they would have to end up hiring a circular economy expert or a specialist. So as we speak now, if you look for an expert in that area, you're looking for a cross-cutting sector, either as a green growth expert or a resource efficient or a cleaner production expert. I mean, aligning with those concepts, or renewable energy expert or waste management expert. But it takes time to actually generate that knowledge and capacity to train efficient workforce in that caliber or in that sector. So my suggestion is the public sector's role should be to finance or to mobilize resources for building the capacity, to de-risk that capacity. I mean, public universities as such don't have much finance, which is extra to take risks in new sectors, but they could mobilize resources to teach or build the capacity, especially in developing nations. Thank you.
Thank you. Agreed. I think we do need to look at it in terms of de-risking, not only from that side of things, but also from the banking sector or any other component. We're out of time. Jokuru, I think if you could just close us off. Wasa, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you, everyone. Jokuru.
Thank you so much, Chris, as well as Wasa, for this very interesting conversation. I think I'm also in the process of still absorbing everything that has been said. I think there are a lot of questions that come up for me with regards to financing. I think one that we haven't necessarily touched on, which I would have been interested in finding out about and perhaps doing more research on, is impact investing and seeing how how the circular economy relates to that and how impact investing can be brought into the discussion, but also what this means for the circular economy. There's just so many questions that we obviously won't be able to answer in just this one session. But yeah, with so much emerging, I hope that everyone is able to take on some of these ideas and find ways in which they can either expand more on this or see ways in which they could support, especially if, for example, you are someone who works in the financial sector on projects that relate to funding the circular economy, or if you have an interest in this and learning more about it. Also, I think something to just highlight, which has emerged from both what Chris has mentioned, but also from Wasa, is that we all have a role to play in taking forward some of these ideas. I think so many of them have come up. So definitely being proactive in the space and taking these ideas forward. So also thank you so much to the audience as well for these contributions to the discussion today. I hope the session has been very insightful to all of you, but particularly to circular economy entrepreneurs who have been in attendance, not only in today's session, but in all the sessions we've had throughout the series. So just to point out that the Building Capacity for Circular Economy Innovation webinar has been a 6-part series that sought to address the question of what is needed to support small businesses and entrepreneurs to innovate for circular systems, products, as well as services. And so to recap what has happened over the past six months, firstly, we had our first session in February where we had a discussion around, or rather looking at how we can bridge the transition from linear to circular by looking at circular supply chain models. We then had another session, which was our second session, that focused on how we could design systems and policy frameworks for circular economy innovation. In our third session, we focused on the importance of leveraging partnerships for circular development. We then had a session that was about building human capital, where we considered the role that education on circular economy plays and looking at how circular economy innovation should be happening across all stages of life, whether it be in primary school, in kindergarten, in university, in the workplace. It doesn't matter whether you've been in the industry for just 1 year or 20 years, but being able to continuously innovate and learn from the new ideas that continue to emerge. And then our fifth session was on the Flourishing circular entrepreneurial ecosystem. And this looked at ideas from implementation all the way to execution. And in that session, we had entrepreneurs and experts who came to share their experiences on circular economy businesses. And today we've had this discussion with Chris and Wasa on how we de-risk circular businesses to unlock funding for financing opportunities. So you can revisit these sessions by going to our ACE Africa website, which will be pasted in the chat, where you can just get a sense of what each of the sessions has been about by either watching the video recordings of the sessions or reading the reports that give an overview of what each of the sessions was about. I think I would also like to just take a moment to note that throughout the series, we have been sharing a link to a paper series called The Circular Economy in Africa, Examples and Opportunities, which was a paper series that was worked on by, with contributions from ICLEI Africa, as well as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and a number of other organizations. And these include examples and opportunities for the circular economy across various sectors, such as food, policy, and one of them, which is what our discussion was about today, financing. So we would like your feedback on those papers, as well as some of your reflection on them. So please look at the chat for a link to this, and would like you to explore at least one or all of the articles from the paper series and share your feedback by using the link to the paper series that has been shared in the chat. Additionally, please keep a lookout for upcoming publications from ACE Africa project. So there will be a few publications that will come out from this project, some of them including one that has been shared in previous sessions, which was a catalog of circular economy ideas. And we will be having more versions of that one coming out, one which will be on circular economy ideas for local governments. So other further information regarding the project will also be shared via email or on the web page to ACE Africa, so please keep a lookout there. And then lastly, please let us know whether this session has been useful by clicking the link to the post-session survey, which was also shared in the chat. But just to say thank you so much to Chris and Wasa for the facilitation and discussion in today's session, but then also to the whole team that has been working to put together this series, speakers also from past sessions, as well as all the participants who have joined and engaged with us over the past 6 sessions. So thank you everyone for joining us today and for engaging with us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Great.
Thank you.